Hey fellow tennis nerds, welcome to This Week in Tennis. There's a lot to summarize, there's a lot to talk about for the French Open, but I'm gonna focus a little bit on gear because I know many of you are gearheads. This has been a rainy, cold and quite difficult French Open in many ways, especially probably for the people there. I haven't been there, but it has looked pretty rough, and you've seen long trousers on Medvedev and you've seen pretty much everything so far. And now the weather seems to be a bit better. The favorites are going through the tournament pretty easily, you have to say. The Musetti-Djokovic match was the best tennis I've seen so far. Novak in the end came through at like 3 in the morning. Tennis has these crazy scheduling issues, especially with delayed matches. There should be solutions for this, even if it rains, but this keeps happening, so what to do? But there was also the opposite of a 5-set match ending at 3. There was the Iga Swiatek complete rout of Potapova. Tough one for her. She won only 10 points in under 40 minutes, I think. So there's been a little bit of everything at this French Open, and we are looking towards the quarterfinals. There are loads of predictions and thoughts around this on tennisnerd.net by our writers and myself, of course, and try to give you analysis, predictions, odds and whatnot. Who do you think will win now? We have all the favorites there pretty much. We have Zverev still at the time of talking to you. We have Novak, who's playing better and better and better. I think this is a worry for the rest of the field. Alcaraz is looking pretty decent, I must say. And Sinner had problems, 1 set to Moutet. And some people can't stand Moutet because he seems to rile players and refs up and the audience if they're not French. But the French crowd loves him. I kind of like him because he's something different. He creates some drama. He's a showman, and he hit so many drop shots and a few underarm serves, 1 ace underarm serve against Sinner, and Sinner looked completely lost in the first set in the match yesterday, that was. And but I still thought, okay, this is good for 1 set of greatest hits tennis, and then things will collapse and Sinner will win in 4 sets. And that happened. We've watched enough tennis now to see the patterns over and over again. We've seen Novak be looking pretty tired, looking pretty down and out. 2 sets down, 2 sets to 1 down, and he still comes back to win. These patterns repeat themselves. These guys play a different ball game, Sinner, Djokovic, Alcaraz, and we'll see who wins. Zverev is still in the tournament, as I said, but he's playing tonight. And we'll see. It's going to be a tough match against Rune. And we have predicted stuff on tennisnerd.net. I've also talked about some new rackets. And one thing we have to mention is, of course, the Novak Djokovic head speed legend. The new signature frame. This was a disappointment for me personally, because I thought they would bring out something close to what Djokovic is playing. As you know, I made videos, maybe several videos now, of Djokovic's personal racket, as I own one of them, and I've held many of them because he's around here in Marbella, and Nicky strings for him, etc, etc. So it's a racket that's pretty familiar to me. They could have adjusted this a little bit and said, hey, you know, this is the signature frame. They could have made a compromise and said, okay, here's a 98 square inch, 22 millimeter beam, 18-19 pattern, Djokovic signature, the Head Speed Pro Legend, which is now what it's called. But they didn't do that. They doubled down on their strategy, and it's just a Head Speed Pro and a Head Speed MP, and they're both blacked out, and they're now the Speed Pro Legend, which I thought was very disappointing, to be fair. I just thought it was the wrong way to go. I thought this could be a way to introduce either Novak's real racket, the 95 screen 18-19, which many players would find very difficult to use, but tennis nerds and tennis lovers, they still want to own these rackets and try them. So there's a value to that, I think, for people who they're not playing tennis to win matches or tournaments or become much better tennis players. They enjoy the hitting, they enjoy the recreational aspect, getting away from work or whatever. So I think there was a point to be made there that they could have released Novak's mold and they could have made it lighter than what Novak plays, made some tweaks, but at least it has to have the identity of the frame. And it didn't really have that because it's just a Speed Pro 18-20, and I think the Speed Pro and Novak's frame, despite being kind of control rackets, both of them play very differently and are 2 different rackets. One being 100 square inch head size 18-20, one being 95 square inch 18-19. The differences are too wide apart, and I don't think that's great. I mean, Wilson did it with the Pro Staff RF97, Babolat did it with the Rafa Origin. Okay, it's not exactly the same mold as Rafa uses, but it's as close as you can get to the Rafa original frame. So gutsy move. They might not sell a bucket load of the Rafa Origins, but then they sell the lighter one, you know. So there's always a way to get around this. You can have a light version of the signature, and people can use the frame that they enjoy from their top pro. Maybe this is just a problem for tennis nerds who are familiar with Novak's racket, who read forums and read Tennis Nerd and whatnot. So, but it's just a little bit disappointing that they had this chance, and every year they do a blackout version for Novak because he doesn't like these white rackets, and now they made a new name. So yeah, that was a little bit of a disappointment, but it's available to buy if you like it. I mean, it looks good. Talking about rackets, there's also information about Madison Keys' racket on the website. She's out from the tournament. She lost in 2 tiebreaks to Emma Navarro, who is a strong up-and-coming player, of course. But she has made a switch, Madison Keys. It was talked about on the Serve podcast and also in interviews. I think it's from the H19, the Wilson Ultra Pro. A very, very control-oriented frame with a thin beam. I made some reviews about it in the past. Partly as the Ultra Pro, but also as the H19, which is kind of the official Pro stock code. And nice racket, very low powered, kind of like a Prestige, so you need to generate your own pace. But she did quite the change, but it was a little bit more balanced than what you've seen with Andy now and stuff like that. It's a bit different, this change. So she went to the H22, which has a thicker beam. It's still a control racket, but she went from an 1820 on the H19 to a 1619 string pattern, and that opens up a lot more launch and a little bit more free depth, and the thicker beam is going to give you more power. So to kind of compensate that, so the change wasn't too drastic, she reduced her swing weight by around 10 points, and the Ultra Pro she used to string with the gut in the crosses, and gut usually adds some power and maybe deducts a little bit of launch angle from the racket. And here she went full Bedalo power. It's going to give her more control, a little bit more spin potential, but also a higher launch angle. She's going to get a little bit more lift on her shots, but she seems to have liked this change, and it has played well with the new racket. So if you're playing with a certain setup and you don't want to do things too drastically, you can reduce weight, increase weight to kind of tweak the racket in the way you want. So it's not like too much of a difference from what you use. I also wrote a post about Rybakina's racket because there were a lot of questions about that. She plays with what looks like a VCore 100 from 2023, but if you look at the mold of the racket, it's not the very kind of distinct shape of the VCore 100 from last year. It's a SV racket, and the SV racket of the Onyx line is something that many pros like. I mean, Chapo played with the SV95. Not sure if he's still with it or if he's using the new one. I would guess still with that one. Because pros usually like a pretty raw feel, not too much dampening. I mentioned Rafa before with the Aero Pro Drive Original, which is much more raw. And rackets today, modern rackets, they have a lot more dampening in them. And it's good for people struggling with tennis elbow who don't hit the ball maybe perfectly in the middle. But pros, they hit and hit and hit, and they have the skill obviously to keep middling the ball, keep hitting it in the sweet spot. Not on every shot, of course, because tennis is fast, especially on their level, but they have the skill to do that, and they want as much feel that they can and as much connection to the ball, something we talk about a lot as reviewers, but it's an important aspect of a racket also for rec players such as you and me. But the rawer feel is something that the pros keep wanting to go back to. Also, when you play with a racket and you're having success, maybe as a junior, you stick with that racket, you don't change. I mean, there have been changes. We have seen Rublev from the 6-195 and Medvedev from the 6-195 and Shapo from the 6-195 from Wilson, which was such an icon, moved to different rackets. The Technifiber for Medvedev, T-Fight, old T-Fight model, and the Gravity Pro for Rublev, as you know. So it makes sense that they stick with what they like, and as I always say on this channel, like if you can avoid doing stuff that I do, have so many rackets on rotation when you play, testing strings, testing string tension, testing gear, testing specs, customizations, always with new rackets, like get that muscle memory and work on your game instead. There's some upcoming racket reviews heading your way. Patrons, members on the YouTube channel, they already know this. Also always do first impressions almost like a month or more before I publish any reviews. So if you want the news before everyone else, please join YouTube or patreon.com. It's not a huge cost, and I try to give value as much as I can. So there's reviews of the Prestige Pro 1619, available only at Tennis Warehouse Europe. 10% off with T-Nerd 10. Interesting frame for sure. This Phantom 100X, the whole family of Phantoms will be reviewed also on the channel. So make sure you subscribe, you don't miss that. That's an interesting frame. Also curious to know if you want me to do a video testing light rackets. So rackets that are like team models, for example. Usually light rackets have team models. I have a bunch of team or MP lights, some diadem head, that I can do a test and talk about light rackets. There's obviously a benefit to light rackets as well. I've done the videos with Daniel about heavy rackets, and I do like heavier rackets myself, as you might know, but I've over the years maybe reduced the static weight a bit, and still going kind of up in swing weight as I'm improving my game, but overall I'm definitely not playing with like a Rafa Origin and stuff like that. But there's something for light rackets. There was a guy who contacted me and said like, oh, well, I had a epiphany. I played with a 285 gram racket and it played great, and I was just controlling the ball with spin. And this happens. And the only thing I can say to that is great. You're happy you enjoyed it, but you need time to know if this is going to work in the long run. Because when you play with a certain racket, whether it's an ultra heavy one like the Rafa Origin or it's a super light one like this Head Speed Team, you need time with it. And there's like, I always try to take at least a month, because I know otherwise I might change my mind. And it's something might pop up in match play where I'm feeling like, okay, this is not working out for me. And that is very, very common. So you have a great session one day, and then the next day you have a not so great session, and then it's up and down, or things just go south, or you learn to adjust the racket, the things you need to adjust to. But overall, and that is very, very common. So make sure you test properly. But if you want a video about light rackets and the benefits and the downsides of them, like we did with the heavy rackets, let me know in the comments. Last but not least, since this is kind of a gear focused one, we're still in the RG, but I want to highlight this beaut of a racket. And this is a great feeling frame. It's a Head Prestige liquid metal, Prestige MP, and back then that was called. Just a beautiful feeling racket, but very, very difficult to use today in today's game. Not much of a sweet spot, but when you hit the sweet spot, it's buttery. So if you find one and you want to have a really nice feeling frame with very little power, this one is very, very good. Just want to put that out as kind of a classic racket spot. Some interesting scenes yesterday when Hubert Hurkacz wanted to replace the ref, the umpire, in his match against Dimitrov, and he tried to do like a mutiny and talk to Dimitrov in the middle of the match at 6-5 to him in the third set. He was in a weird mood yesterday, Hurkacz. He seems like a super nice guy, as do Dimitrov, but yesterday he was behaving weirdly, and asking for the ref to be replaced was strange. I've never seen that, I think. Yeah, I don't know what got into his head, but it was a bit fun scene. Grand Slams, man, that's what's going on. There's a lot of funny stuff happening. But hopefully now, week 2, we'll get some good tennis and some good weather for you in Paris. And let me know who you think will win on the men's and the women's side. I predict Swiatek, and I predicted Sinner before the tournament. We will see if these things stay. I think in other ways my predictions have gone completely to crap, but those two are still in the draw and looking pretty strong. That's it for today. Have a nice day, and don't forget to play some tennis.